Um, Imagine polling so poorly that only 1 in 3 Americans support your ongoing military campaign. Meanwhile, gas prices are just skyrocketing across the country. And in the middle of all this, your press secretary decides to describe your war room cabinet meeting at Camp David as, quote, a lot of fun.
It is a jarring reality in Washington right now, especially given the stakes on the ground.
It really is. Welcome to the Clarion Ratio Daily World Brief, available at clarionratio.com. As of our episode date, August 1st, 2026, the severe escalation of the U.S.-Israel war on Iran has reached a really critical threshold, and it's generating direct consequences for global shipping in American households.
Because on Friday, Iran struck 2 tankers in the Strait of Hormuz. These vessels were operating under U.S. military escort, and Tehran claimed the ships were using some undeclared route. The U.S. retaliated forcefully with strikes on approximately 90 targets across Iran.
And the immediate public consequence of this military escalation is severe economic friction. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a body of water. Historically, it handled 20% of global liquefied natural gas and oil. And now it is effectively closed to normal commercial traffic.
Right, and when you look at crude oil pushing past $90 a barrel, you aren't just looking at abstract geopolitical friction. You are going to feel that directly at the grocery store next week. For U.S. households, a choked strait translates instantly into surging gas and food prices.
Which obviously intensifies inflation just months ahead of the November midterm elections. It moves the conflict from a distant foreign policy event to, well, a daily financial strain on consumers. President Donald Trump gathered his cabinet at Camp David on Friday to discuss this war, which has dragged on for 5 months despite initial promises of a swift resolution.
So at what point does domestic political fatigue combined with the sheer cost of living force a change in military strategy? Because fatigue often dictates policy when military objectives stall out against physical realities.
Especially since the U.S. is attempting to forcefully reopen a strait where Iran exercises significant geographic leverage.
Exactly. The mechanism here is asymmetric warfare. Iran does not need massive destroyer ships to close the waterway. They use fast attack boats and coastal mobile missile batteries. Relying on continuous U.S. aerial strikes on fixed Iranian land targets has not dismantled Tehran's ability to disrupt the water.
Leaving the White House facing a scenario where the economic blowback of their own retaliatory strategy is actively undermining their domestic political standing ahead of a major election.
And we are seeing a superpower manage a stalling war in the Gulf while simultaneously remaining deeply entangled in a rapidly escalating conflict in Eastern Europe.
Moving to that, Ukraine recently suffered Russian ballistic missile strikes on Kyiv, resulting in at least 9 deaths and dozens of injuries. In direct retaliation, Ukrainian drones sank the Yanina, a Russian-owned 100,000-ton capacity container ship in the Black Sea.
Though Moscow confirmed all 17 crew members were rescued, they immediately labeled the attack on the vessel as an act of piracy, claiming it was carrying civilian goods.
But those Russian strikes on Kyiv really highlight a highly specific vulnerability in Ukraine's defense architecture, which is ballistic missiles, right?
Yeah, unlike cruise missiles, which fly closer to the ground and can sometimes be intercepted by standard anti-air fire, a ballistic missile follows a massive arcing trajectory. It practically leaves the atmosphere before slamming down at immense speeds.
And the country is critically low on U.S.-made Patriot interceptors, which possess the specialized radar and kinetic kill vehicle technology required to hit a ballistic threat mid-air. They remain the only weapon in Ukraine's arsenal capable of downing these specific threats.
Which is why earlier in the week, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky met with Trump in Washington. What stands out to me here is that Zelensky didn't just ask for more physical shipments of missiles. He requested a license for Ukraine to manufacture these Patriot missiles domestically.
But on Friday, Trump stated the U.S. had not agreed to the request, calling the sharing of advanced weaponry a big step. He expressed concern that allies given such technology might someday, quote, turn on you. How does licensing actually work in this specific context?
Defense licensing is basically the transfer of intellectual property and manufacturing blueprints. It allows a foreign nation to build American military hardware in their own factories using their own labor and supply chains. By denying the license, Washington is drawing a really hard line on technology transfer.
Framing the denial around the fear that a current ally, one fighting an active invasion, might eventually turn American technology against the U.S., that introduces a heavy layer of transactional skepticism into long-standing defense partnerships.
It definitely signals to other allies that defense cooperation is not some permanent ideological bond. It's a conditional arrangement subject to high levels of distrust.
Speaking of transactional approaches to long-standing alliances, Washington is also opening a new economic front against European partners. President Trump has threatened to launch a Section 301 tariff investigation against the European Union.
And this threat is a direct response to the EU levying a roughly $1 billion fine against Google for allegedly giving unfair preference to its own search engine and Play app.
But wait, what actually is a Section 301 investigation? How does that allow the executive branch to bypass normal international trade protocols?
Well, Section 301 is a provision of the U.S. Trade Act of 1974. It grants the president the unilateral authority to impose tariffs or other trade restrictions if a foreign country is deemed to be acting unreasonably or unfairly against U.S. commerce.
Crucially, it allows the executive branch to act without waiting for authorization from international bodies like the World Trade Organization.
Right. So in this case, the administration is interpreting a foreign regulatory fine against a single American tech company as an unreasonable burden on U.S. commerce, thereby justifying sweeping retaliatory tariffs against the entire bloc.
You can think of it like a hostile corporate takeover. Normally, international trade disputes go through the WTO, that's the boardroom. But using a Section 301 tariff is like a CEO bypassing the board of directors entirely to launch a hostile takeover simply because one of his subsidiary companies got slapped with a regulatory fine.
Treating international trade agreements this way raises serious questions about long-term civic impacts. It essentially weaponizes national trade policy to shield a private tech monopoly from overseas market regulation.
And Trump took to his social platform to call the EU a piggy bank that is robbing American companies. This comes shortly after the U.S. imposed new tariffs on the EU regarding forced labor and supply chains, compounding the fracture in transatlantic trade.
And Europe is heavily fractured internally over border pressures, making these external transatlantic trade disputes even more destabilizing. On Tuesday, July 30th, an influx of roughly 60,000 migrants crossed from Morocco into the Spanish enclave of Ceuta.
The human toll there has been devastating. The death toll from the crossings has risen to at least 67, and the political fallout across Europe has been immediate and severe.
Italy responded by temporarily suspending the EU's border-free Schengen arrangement with Spain, a move publicly backed by Finland and Denmark.
Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez sent a letter to the European Commission president condemning the reaction of these member states as selfish, polarizing, and unlawful. Sanchez pointed out a really crucial geographic reality here, which is that Ceuta is an enclave on the North African coast. It isn't even part of the Schengen area.
Exactly. So if Ceuta isn't in the Schengen zone, suspending the treaty doesn't work as a practical border control policy. It works as a political signal. The Schengen area is a foundational legal treaty of the European project that abolished passports and internal border controls between member states,
allowing citizens to move freely from Madrid to Berlin. By suspending it with Spain over an event in Ceuta, countries like Italy and Finland are essentially reinstating internal passport checks and border guards.
Suspending it over localized migration surges at an external, non-Schengen border highlights a profound lack of unified European asylum policy. It reveals the fragility of border-free treaties when nationalist political pressures rise.
They are prioritizing domestic security optics over the collective legal framework of the European Union, signaling a massive retreat from the bloc's core ideals. And while political borders are tightening, environmental pressures are ignoring those boundaries entirely.
The UN Secretary-General warned that a strengthening El Niño is pushing a planet on fire into uncharted territory. This climate pattern specifically threatens India's monsoon, raising the risk of severe droughts and floods.
In Europe, the effects are immediate and highly physical. Hundreds of people are being evacuated by sea due to wildfires in central Greece. And in Germany, the Rhine River has hit a near-record low of 68 centimeters in Cologne.
That water level severely threatens commercial shipping, as vessels are forced to drastically reduce their cargo weight just to avoid running aground.
So this physical environmental resource scarcity runs entirely parallel to a growing human exploitation linked to digital energy theft. Before we get into how these crime syndicates are stealing energy, I want to remind listeners that for more daily briefings, brain candy explainers, and classic audiobooks, visit clarinhoratio.com. So how does this energy theft actually work?
In Southeast Asia, specifically Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia, Organized crime syndicates are stealing massive amounts of electricity to run illegal cryptocurrency mining operations. In Malaysia alone, the national utility identified nearly 14,000 premises linked to electricity theft, with utility losses reaching roughly $1.1 billion.
How do you physically steal $1 billion of electricity without the grid noticing immediately? We tend to think of crypto as purely digital, but the physical consequences of the digital economy are immense.
Well, you steal it by physically bypassing the utility meters. These syndicates physically tap into the main supply lines or substations before the electricity reaches the building's meter.
Cryptocurrency mining requires rows upon rows of specialized, high-powered computers running complex algorithms 24 hours a day, right? The power draw must be industrial.
It is. It generates immense heat and pulls so much voltage that it frequently causes local transformers to blow, leading to widespread neighborhood blackouts. The utility companies notice the overall drain on the grid, obviously, but locating the specific illicit tap in a sprawling urban environment requires extensive physical rating and surveillance.
While municipal governments struggle to keep the lights on and vital rivers dry up due to extreme heat, industrial-scale cyber networks are siphoning off vast amounts of public energy grids. It's a direct, physical transfer of public resources to anonymous digital ledgers.
Moving from the theft of public resources to the violent suppression of public assembly, the situation in India reveals a severe escalation in state violence against citizens.
During the massive Cockroach Agenda Party education protests in Delhi in late July, overwhelming violence broke out. Medical records and independent ballistic experts have confirmed that police and paramilitary forces used 12-gauge pump-action pellet guns loaded with birdshot against the protesting crowds.
I need to unpack this because the Indian government claims no, quote, bullets were fired. But a 12-gauge shotgun shell loaded with birdshot does not fire a single solid bullet.
The government is using a semantic defense that entirely obscures the reality of the injuries. When the trigger is pulled, it fires hundreds of tiny lead or steel pellets that spread out in a wide, indiscriminate cone.
These weapons are designed for hunting birds in flight, where accuracy is less important than creating a wide net of lethal projectiles. When fired at human beings in a crowd, these hundreds of metal pellets embed themselves into skin, muscle, and bone.
The human impact of using hunting weapons for crowd control is devastating. Dozens of protesters have been left with severe, potentially life-changing injuries and toxic lead embedded in their bodies. A 19-year-old student, Sahil Lakhab, faces the potential loss of an eye, with his face and body peppered with tiny holes from the birdshot.
Using weapons designed to spread hundreds of metal pellets indiscriminately into a crowd in a democratic capital represents a severe erosion of civil liberties. These weapons have a long history of use by security forces in Indian-administered Kashmir, where they have blinded and killed civilians over the years.
But deploying them in Delhi, the capital city, marks a significant threshold being crossed in how the state manages civilian dissent. It normalizes military-style escalation against domestic education protests.
And state and paramilitary violence is taking on an even more entrenched form in the West Bank. Following the death of a security guard from the unauthorized Israeli settler outpost of Havat Gilad, a wave of settler attacks struck neighboring Palestinian villages.
These outposts operate without Israeli planning permission, but expand rapidly under the protection of the current government.
In a rare interview, Israeli settler Yehuda Shimon openly justified the attacks as revenge. He stated on the record that one Jewish life is worth 10 million Palestinian lives, and suggested that Palestinians who refuse to leave or live quietly must be killed.
The civic context driving this violence is a stark legal disparity. These outposts are illegal under international law, yet they continue to expand under the protection of the Israeli military.
The mechanism enabling this is a dual legal system operating in the exact same territory. Israelis living in the West Bank are subject to civilian law and receive military protection, while Palestinians living in the same geographic area are subject to military occupation and martial law.
Human rights groups warn this dynamic enables unchecked extremism and creates a tiered system of human rights where settler violence operates with near impunity. When you step back, today's stories do not share a single, neatly packaged through line. We aren't looking at a unified global supply chain breakdown.
No, instead we are witnessing distinct, compounding pressures moving in entirely different directions. We have military chokeholds artificially constraining energy supplies in the Gulf. We have nationalist border panics fracturing foundational treaties in Europe.
And we are seeing the severe physical erosion of civil liberties in both India and the West Bank. Across all these distinct events, from citizens dodging pellet guns in Delhi, to American families paying the price for the Hormuz blockade, to Palestinians facing unchecked settler violence, one terrifying pattern does emerge regarding accountability.
The institutional and legal safeguards designed to protect ordinary people from state and geopolitical violence appear to be entirely absent. It really makes you wonder who steps in when the rule of law retreats.
That is the question we are left with. For more Daily World Briefs and Debate Candy episodes, visit clarineratio.com.